So I want you to picture a community that, on paper at least, looks like an absolute utopia of moral virtue. Really want you to visualize this. You walk down the street and you see these grand architectural marvels of worship on every corner.
Right. The air probably smells like incense and piety.
Exactly. And the people, they're incredibly disciplined. I mean, we are talking about fasting in the blistering heat of summer with zero complaints. They're reciting scripture late into the night every single night, and the philanthropy is just off the charts. Millions of dollars flowing into food banks, orphanages, ransom payments for prisoners. It is this, well-oiled machine of goodness.
Yeah. From the outside looking in, you would check every single box. You'd look at that and say, well, this is a faithful society. This is a pious community. It's essentially the gold standard of religious observance.
Right. It's what we all kind of aspire to. But we are looking at a source today. It's a lecture from November 24th, 1968, analyzing a specific section of the Quran, specifically Surah al-Baqarah, verses 89 through 96. And this source looks at this exact same society and calls it godless.
Which is quite the statement.
It is. It doesn't just say they are missing the mark or that they could do a little better. It actually accuses them of being in a state of kufr or disbelief, and specifically because of how they handled that charity and those rituals.
It is a paradox that just hits you like a cold shower. The source is essentially arguing that you can be religious in practice, you can be ritualistically perfect, but you could be effectively atheist in your structure.
And that is the tension we are unpacking today. Welcome to the deep dive. We are looking into what the sources call the architecture of systemic reform. Now, to you listening, don't worry. This isn't a theology lesson. We aren't here to preach at you or take any sides.
No, not at all.
This is a deep critique of social systems. We're going to explore a very uncomfortable idea that the source puts forward. The idea that doing good giving to charity, helping the poor, being the nice guy, can actually be a crime if you are doing it to prop up a broken system.
It raises this really terrifying question. Are we actually fixing the problem, or are we just paying rent to live comfortably inside the problem?
Yeah. So put aside your preconceptions about religious texts for a moment. This analysis treats the text as a manifesto for social revolution. We are going to cover the trap of selective faith, the source's incredibly heavy critique of capitalism, the psychological barriers that stop us from seeing the truth, and finally, the ultimate litmus test of your own conviction.
Which is how you feel about death.
Yeah, that last one.
The exam of death. It completely reframes mortality. It turns the fear of death into this diagnostic tool for your soul.
It really does. But we have to start with the crime itself. Segment 1. The source zooms in on a historical legal drama involving the Israelites to explain a concept called the paradox of the good criminal. Walk us through the scene here, because when I read it, it sounded like a racketeering case from a mafia movie.
It is almost mafia logic, honestly. So the source breaks down verse 85 of Surah al-Baqarah, and it describes this historical cycle where this community, the Israelites of that specific era, would actively create conditions to evict their own people. And when the text says evict, it implies a lot of moving parts. It implies using economic pressure, social alienation, or legal maneuvering to drive a segment of their own population into pure destitution and homelessness.
Okay, so step 1 is active harm. They are the architects of the poverty. They are the reason these people are out on the street to begin with.
Correct. They are the root cause. But then comes the twist. Once those evicted people were destitute or perhaps captured by enemies because they had no protection and were totally vulnerable out there, that same community, the evictors, would suddenly pivot.
They changed their tune.
Exactly. They would pool their resources, hold fundraisers, and pay ransoms to bring them back or feed them.
So let me get this straight. They kick them out the front door, and then they pay to let them back in the side door.
And here is the real kicker. They felt incredibly good about themselves for doing it. The source says they considered the ransom payment a great virtue. They looked at their charity and said, look at us, saving our brethren. Look how generous we are.
Unbelievable.
They completely compartmentalized the fact that they were the ones who broke the system and ruined these people's lives in the first place.
It's like breaking someone's legs with a baseball bat in an alley and then expecting a medal because you paid for their crutches and signed their cast.
That is the exact analogy the source uses, actually. It talks about the absolute absurdity of wounding someone and then seeking praise for applying the bandage. And the verdict from the text is brutal. It asks, do you believe in part of the book and reject the rest?
Selective faith.
Right. It calls this selective faith. They loved the rescue part of the law because it made them feel like heroes. It fed their ego. but they flat out rejected the justice part of the law that forbade the eviction in the first place.
And the source defines this not as a mistake or, a learning opportunity, but as kufra, disbelief. That feels like a very heavy label for what we might just call hypocrisy.
The source argues it is way worse than hypocrisy, because hypocrisy is pretending to be something you aren't.
Right.
This is a fundamental misunderstanding of the assignment. This is thinking you are doing God's work when you are actively undermining it.
Yeah.
The source says the punishment for this, for building a society on Band-Aids while ignoring the wound, is disgrace in this world.
Disgrace in this world. That really caught my attention because usually, religious texts threaten you with fire and brimstone in the afterlife, but this is talking about the here and now.
It is a sociological prediction. Think about it. A society that relies on philanthropy to cover up systemic injustice is inherently unstable. It creates a permanent underclass.
It creates massive resentment.
Exactly. It creates this volatile gap between the saviors and the saved. Eventually, that structure collapses or is subjugated by a more cohesive system. That is the disgrace. You cannot sustain a civilization on GoFundMe campaigns if the economic engine is designed to crush people.
That is such a stinging indictment of modern philanthropy. I mean, we see billionaires giving away fortunes to fix problems that their own business models helped create. We applaud the donation, but we rarely critique the extraction that made the donation possible in the first place.
And the source would argue that the philanthropist who supports the oppressive system is actually the criminal. It completely inverts our moral hierarchy. We celebrate the donor. The source asks, well, why was the donation needed? Who created the deficit?
Which leads us perfectly into the economic critique. Segment 2. The source doesn't just talk about ancient tribes. It pivots to a hard critique of the mixed system and explicitly names capitalism. Now, keep in mind for everyone listening, this lecture is from 1968, so the Cold War is happening in the background. But man, the analysis feels very current.
It is surprisingly sharp for the era. The source defines this false system as one where a wealthy minority hoards the labor and resources of the vast majority. And it specifically cites 80 to 90% of the population being exploited.
That 90% figure is startling. It implies that almost everyone is working, but the surplus, the actual value they create with their hands and minds, is being siphoned off.
Siphoned off and heavily concentrated at the top. The source argues that the result of this hoarding is that the majority is left destitute. They can't afford decent food, medicine, or education. The system effectively strips them of their dignity. It turns them into beggars in their own land.
But here is the friction point. In these capitalist societies, both then and now, we see a lot of religious activity. We see pious rich people. Wow. We see massive foundations. We see grand charitable gestures.
So that is what the source calls the illusion of piety. It lists these acts specifically: building mosques, running orphanages, giving the standard 2.5% zakat, cooking large pots of food, what they call dags for the poor.
Jags. I can just picture it. The steam rising, the long lines of hungry people, the wealthy donors standing there ladling out soup, feeling so humble, maybe having a photographer snap a picture for the local paper.
It is a really powerful image of charity. But the source dismisses it as farabi nafs, which translates to deception of the self. The argument is that maintaining a system that forces people to stand in that soup line is a grave crime. Haram. It says that Islam does not recognize isolated individual salvation that acts as an expiation for a collective false system.
That is the core concept right there. You can't save your own soul in isolation if you are funding a collective hell. You can't build a private stairway to heaven on the backs of the poor.
Exactly. If the system is fundamentally designed to produce poverty, your charity isn't a cure. It is an anesthetic. It keeps the poor just alive enough not to revolt, and it keeps the rich feeling just virtuous enough to sleep at night. It maintains the equilibrium of oppression.
It is a mechanism of control.
It is. And the source implies that the crime isn't the charity itself. Feeding people is good, obviously. No one is saying don't feed the hungry. The crime is the reliance on charity as a solution. The big takeaway here is that the system itself must be designed so that no one is left destitute in the first place.
This is a radical shift in perspective. Usually we think, well, poverty is a natural fact of life like the weather. Sometimes it rains, sometimes you're poor, so I should give money to help. But this view says, no, poverty is a man-made injury. If you aren't fixing the injury, stop bragging about the bandage.
It removes the ego from the act of giving. It transforms the whole discussion from generosity to justice. Generosity is optional. justice is mandatory.
Well, why is this so hard for people to see? If the text is this clear, don't evict, don't hoard, why do religious communities, specifically the ones this source is critiquing, constantly fall into this trap? This moves us to segment 3, the intellectual barriers. The source quotes verse 88, "Our hearts are wrapped."
Or sealed. It is a fascinating psychological diagnosis. The source identifies the arrogance of knowledge as the primary wrapper around the heart.
Oh, I know this type. I read all the books, don't tell me anything new type of person. The academic gatekeeper.
Yeah, it is the expert's dilemma. The source describes religious leaders or intellectuals who claim we know everything or we have studied for 18 years, there is no more room for knowledge. The analogy used is a cup,
A cup that is already full.
or even worse, a cup turned upside down. It doesn't matter how much rain falls, it can't hold a single drop. The source argues that knowledge is infinite. The moment you claim you are done learning or that you possess the absolute truth, you are in a form of self-imposed deprivation. You are cursed because you have cut yourself off from growth. You cannot see the systemic issues because you have decided your current understanding is already perfect.
It is the death of curiosity. And if you aren't curious, you can't critique the system you are living in. You just defend it. You become an apologist for the status quo.
And that defense mechanism usually manifests as sectarian and group bias. The source uses a really grounded, relatable example here regarding elections.
The voting analogy. I loved this part because it felt so modern. It feels like something we literally see every election cycle.
It really does. The source describes a voter who rejects a perfectly competent candidate simply because, quote, he isn't from my brotherhood, or he isn't a Jat or an Arain, referring to specific caste or tribal dynamics in South Asia.
Right. It's that mentality of he's not my guy, so I don't care if he's the right guy. He's not on my team.
Precisely. And the source draws a direct parallel to religion. It talks about rejecting truth just because it comes from a different sect. Shia, Sunni, Ali Hadith, Hanafi, or, historically, the Israelites rejecting a prophet because he came from the lineage of Bani Ismail instead of Bani Israel.
It is tribalism masquerading as theology. I won't listen to that interpretation of justice because it comes from a scholar I don't follow. It shuts down the conversation before it even starts.
And that leads to a crucial distinction the source makes between religion, or madhab, and deen, which means faith or way of life. The source defines religion in this context as a cradle of contradictions and divisions.
Yeah.
Essentially, it's the sectarian squabbling we just described. It's the club you belong to.
And Dean, how does the source define that?
Deen is defined as universal human equality. The source uses a beautiful image. Two babies born side by side. Neither has gold, neither has debt. They are absolutely equal in potential and worth.
And then society steps in and ruins it.
Society assigns the caste, the class, the wealth. The source argues that true deen ignores those social layers and judges only by character and competence. If you are prioritizing your group over that universal equality, your heart is wrapped. You can't see the systemic injustice because you are too busy protecting your tribe's position within the unjust system.
This really gets to the heart of the problem. It isn't just about what you know, it is about what you love. Which takes us to segment 4. The calf and the heart.
The golden calf. We all know the story. Moses goes up the mountain, the people get restless, they build a calf out of gold.
But the source says this wasn't just a statue they whipped up because they were bored. It wasn't some arts and crafts project gone wrong.
No, it wasn't just impulsive jewelry crafting. The source argues that the calf represents a deep love of wealth and false ideals that had sunk deep into their hearts. It was a manifestation of what they truly valued. When the prophet, their moral compass was away, their true nature came out. And their true nature was the worship of the worldly system.
There is an analogy here that I absolutely loved, the rent-controlled heart.
It is brilliant, isn't it? The source argues that God cannot enter a heart that is already occupied. If your heart is rented out to 3,000 idols of materialism, bias, and love of the status quo, there is simply no vacancy for the divine. You have to evict the tenant, the love of the worldly system, before the owner can enter.
So you can't just add God to the mix. You can't just have a hardcore capitalist heart and sprinkle some prayer on top.
You have to clear the space. You cannot serve two masters. And because people don't want to do that eviction work because they love their golden calf, they love their comfort, they engage in what the source calls mechanical hearing.
Mechanical hearing. So this sounds like zoning out in a meeting, but on a spiritual level.
It is deeper than zoning out. It is performative listening. The source describes the immense effort people put into listening to the Quran. The Taraweeh prayers, fasting in the intense heat, the long nights of recitation, they are physically present. They are nodding along. They say samina, which means we hear.
But the actions don't match.
The actions scream asina, which means we disobey. The source says this is because they're treating the text as a magical incantation that grants sawab, or reward points, rather than a code of law to implement in real life.
It is the gamification of faith. I collected 500 prayer points today, so I'm good.
Exactly. I got the points, so I don't need to change my lifestyle. They divorce the words entirely from their meaning. If you recite a verse about justice while actively exploiting your workers, you aren't actually hearing the verse. You are just making noises.
And this leads to a very provocative redefinition from the source about killing prophets.
Yeah, this part stopped me cold. Usually when we hear about killing prophets, we think of ancient history, people throwing stones at messengers. But the source says we're doing it today.
The source challenges the literal translation. It argues that to kill a prophet or messenger often means to render their message ineffective, to ridicule them, or, and this is the really insidious part, to ignore their core teachings while pretending to honor them.
So if I build a massive gold-plated shrine to a prophet who lived in poverty and fought for the poor, I am effectively killing him.
You are neutralizing the revolution. You are turning a movement into a monument. Monuments are safe. They don't ask you to change your bank account. They don't ask you to change your politics. Movements are dangerous. The source says you kill the revolution by turning it into a religion.
You kill the revolution by turning it into a religion. That explains why you can have so much religious activity and so little actual justice. The message has been completely defamed. It has been domesticated.
And if you are living that contradiction, professing love for the prophet while killing his message, it creates a deep subconscious anxiety. Which brings us to the ultimate test.
Segment 5, the litmus test, the exam of death.
This is where the rubber really meets the road. The source talks about a group that claims the afterlife is exclusively for us. We are God's favorites.
We have all heard that claim. My group is going to the VIP lounge. Everyone else is doomed. It is a very common feature of the rapt heart.
But the source throws down a challenge in verse 94. It asks, if you are so sure the next life is better and reserved for you, why do you cling so desperately to this wretched life?
It is a harsh question. It really exposes the bluff.
The source notes that these religious claimants are actually the most terrified of death. They wish for 1,000 years of life, according to verse 96.
But is it just survival instinct? I mean, everyone is afraid of dying, right?
The source says it is more than biology. It is guilt. Deep down, they know their account is empty. They know they have lived under a false system and supported it. The analogy used is the escaped convict.
Oh, walk us through that one.
So, imagine a convict who has escaped prison. He wants to live free as long as possible. Not because he necessarily loves the world or is doing great things, but because he fears the police. He knows that the moment he stops running, the law of cause and effect divine justice will catch up with him.
So the fear of death isn't about leaving the world, it is about facing the music.
Exactly. And the source contrasts this with the mu'min, the true believer. And here comes the student analogy, which I think everyone listening can relate to.
Oh, I certainly can. I still have nightmares about finals week.
Right. So imagine two students on the day exam results are posted. The unprepared student knows he didn't study, he partied, he wasted time, he cheated on the homework. When result day comes, he is terrified, he cries, he wants to delay it, he wishes the day would never come.
Because the result confirms his failure. It makes it official. As long as the results aren't out, he can pretend he passed.
Right. Now look at the prepared student. He studied, he put in the work, he knows he aced it. How does he feel?
He is excited. He wants to see the grade. He wants to go home and celebrate.
He smiles. The source says the true believer smiles at death because it is simply result day for a life lived in accordance with the law. It is a celebration. It is Eid.
That reframing is incredible. Death, not as a tragedy, but as a graduation.
And this conviction gives them immense strength. The source argues that a person who does not fear death, because of this conviction in a higher cause, has the strength of 20 men. You cannot threaten a man who views death as a promotion. You cannot bribe a man who doesn't care about your gold.
Contrast that with the teddy boys mentioned in the source, and I just love that 1960s slang.
The soft, privileged youth. They might pray in mosques, they might talk a big game about faith, but when the battlefield calls, when real sacrifice is needed, they flee. Why? Because they hoard life. They cling to survival at all costs, because their faith is just a hobby, not a conviction. They are fair-weather believers.
So we have established the problem, selective faith. We have established the psychology, the golden calf. Now what do we actually do? Segment 6, the path to reform.
This is the practical application. Because the source talks about a transitory period. It is realistic. It says you cannot change a system overnight. You can't just flip a switch and end global capitalism or systemic injustice tomorrow morning.
But you have to have a goal.
Yeah.
You can't just drift along.
You must have a Nazbul ain, a clear, unwavering objective. The goal must be a total shift to a just system, a divine order. The source is very strict here. No patchwork. You cannot mix Islam with capitalism. A mixed system is flat out rejected.
So no capitalism with a sprinkle of zakat, no exploitation with a side of charity.
No, but, and this is the crucial nuance, there is a strategy of gradualism.
How does that work without compromising? How do you accept a transition without accepting the evil of the current system?
The source uses a football team analogy. Imagine a team on the field. Their purpose, their entire reason for being there is to get the ball into the goal. Now, they might be stuck in the middle of the field, they might be passing the ball back and forth because of obstacles or the opposing team's defense.
They aren't scoring yet.
No, they aren't. But every move is calculated to eventually score. If they are content just passing the ball around in the middle of the field forever, if they accept the status quo, they have failed. They're just playing a game. But if they are fighting to move forward, even inches at a time, that is the struggle. That is jihad in the linguistic sense. Struggle.
So how does this relate to charity? If I give $1 to a homeless person, am I just passing the ball in midfield?
This is the key. In the transition period, helping an individual, giving charity, feeding someone is good only if it's part of the larger struggle to change the system.
I see the distinction. If I feed a hungry person while actively fighting to build a world where hunger doesn't exist, that is valid.
Yes, it is logistical support for the revolution. But if I feed a hungry person so that I can feel virtuous and completely ignore the system that made him hungry in the first place.
That is farib, deception.
Exactly. If charity is used to get comfortable with the status quo, it is a drug. If it is used as fuel to keep people alive while we tear down the prison walls, it is revolutionary.
It is all about the vector. Are you patching the wall or are you building a door?
That is the ultimate question the source leaves us with. It forces you to examine your intent not just in the moment, but in the grand scheme of things.
This has been really heavy, but necessary. It really strips away the comfortable veneer of religious life and exposes the machinery underneath. Let's wrap this up.
Let's do it. To summarize, we learned that true faith isn't about ritual, it is about social order. We learned that charity without justice isn't just inefficient, it can actually be a crime if it sustains oppression.
We learned about the golden calf in our hearts, the love of the status quo, and how we kill prophets by ignoring their revolutionary messages while worshiping their names.
And we learned that the ultimate test of our conviction is our relationship with death. Do we fear it like an escaped convict, or do we smile at it like a prepared student?
The source's final takeaway is haunting. It defines a living nation as one that knows how to die for a cause. A nation that hoards life, clinging to survival at all costs, is already dead.
It is a profound paradox. To live truly, you must be willing to let go of life.
So here is a provocative question for you, the listener. Based on everything we have discussed today, think about your own fear of death. The source suggests that your fear is directly correlated to your satisfaction with a corrupt system. If you were told your exam results were coming today, right now, would you smile? Would you feel that excitement of a job well done? Or would you wish for another 1,000 years just to try and balance the books?
That is a question only you can answer in the quiet of your own heart.
Thanks for taking the deep dive with us.
See you next time.